Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Elementary, a great premiere. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I really appreciate us immediately getting a look at, obviously, like Sherlock and Watson's life in London, and obviously like them kind of handling cases on their own. Like I always love that where it's like, oh, when we get dropped at the end of a case, it's like, oh, they're solving a case, and I love that. Joan, obviously, with the new blonde hair, which took me by surprise because I didn't know that was going to be a thing until like I saw promotional material of like Lucy Liu like that, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm like, what's up with the blonde hair? That's whoa. I don't think have I ever seen Lucy Liu as a blonde? I'm trying to remember. I don't think I ever have. I think I've always seen her as a brunette, haven't I? Interesting. I'm thinking about that. I don't know. Well, brunette, more so black hair. She's always had black hair, wasn't brunette. Nevertheless, I'm going on a huge tangent. Nevertheless, but it's kind of neat, kind of, obviously them being neighbors and everything like that. It's kind of interesting too, because there's something that pops up in this episode I didn't even think about. It's like they're in London, so of course they'd run into Kitty, because I saw, Ophelia Lovibond, the actress who plays Kitty. I saw her name, I lost my mind. I was like, right, of course. It didn't even cross my mind at the end of season 6 to even think that was something that would happen. Of course, because she's kicking it in London. I mean, obviously she's working in London and everything, but still, that's pretty dope. But obviously, I also love too that this new situation, like obviously Watson's still adjusting in many different regards because like the person that they're working with, Jones, DCI Jones, turns out like obviously she kind of mocks Watson a little bit about being an American, because it's like, it's like, oh, see what happens when you arrest someone, don't fill them with bullet holes and stuff like that. You can almost arrest them and send them to justice. And Joan is like, just because I'm American doesn't mean I'm all about guns and stuff like that. And she's like, oh, and I bet you don't call football soccer. And it's just like, and she always calling her Doc, and I just love it. It's bugging Watson, because it's like she's always taking a dig at me. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, yes, like she takes those digs at you, but she does respect you and knows that you do good work, which you do phenomenal work, Watson. So, and that is kind of interesting. But obviously this deals with a case that they're taking on, that basically it's kind of like a tabloid celebrity. Her name is Lola. Sadly, she gets acid in her face. And the moment that happened, I was like, yeah, because they kind of bring it up a little bit in this episode, but I was like, right, that's actually a thing in London. Maybe just the UK in general. I don't know if that's 100% like a Europe thing, but I think it was like a UK thing. Like, I'm not that familiar with like European news, but I do remember it being like, yeah, that was kind of like a thing that started springing up in real life, people getting acid in their face. That's a shitty thing to do. But obviously, it's really sad too, because this actress, not actress, but this model Lola, like sadly she ended up killing herself because like the way she looks is kind of her livelihood. So it's that sad situation of like, it's just not just her self-confidence, but her livelihood was threatened at that moment, and she just threw herself down, a lift, that wasn't there. And it's just like, that's heartbreaking that her story plays out like that, because it turns out like this wasn't just some like random attack. It's like, it wasn't like a mugging, it wasn't religiously motivated, it was just kind of like a personal attack. The person burned a lot of stuff in her purse and stuff like that, just to kind of cover a lot of stuff up. And so we start piecing a lot of stuff together about her, in particular the whole situation with her and Ruby Carvel. Now that was an interesting aspect to that case, of learning like, oh, we weren't lovers, she was actually my daughter, I had given her for adoption. And it's kind of interesting because that whole conversation, you can tell with the whole, like, they would cut to Watson and you're like, okay, so that's an interesting thing. We'll talk about Watson's situation after I kind of go through all of this, but it was really interesting hearing her kind of talk about it and everything like that. I also love that thing she said of like, oh yeah, sorry about the place being a mess. It hasn't been cleaned since my dad died. He used to throw orgies here for him and his decrepit friends, saying the fact is, imagine eyes wide shut with more, I think she said ear hair or something like that. So that was interesting. But it turns out, like, for Ruby, like, I guess at some point Lola had found out about like Ruby being her mom, and wanted to get to know her, didn't want to have anything to do with the money and stuff like that. And, I thought it was kind of interesting too, and it's kind of a little, it's like twisted, but there's a little heartwarming sympathy behind it, in the sense that she was like, if you find out that it is so-and-so and you can't prove it, just come to me. I've never had anyone killed before, but I'm not above doing it. And it's like, ugh. I mean, to be fair, it's like her motherly instincts kicked in because like this is her daughter that she's only gotten to know for the past 4 years, but obviously she cared about her, and it's just, it's sad that things kind of played out like that. That she ended up losing a daughter she had only just kind of started to get to know during everything. But, and there was a whole interesting thing about the case of like, okay, when you look at her social media, she started reposting, like 2 weeks ago, she started reposting older pictures and stuff like that. And it's like, why is that the case? Like, why isn't she putting up more recent photos in that 2-week period? And it's like, oh, could we end up finding out that basically she had gotten plastic surgery and she was trying to hide that fact? And that was really interesting. And it turns out that's what got her killed, because it turns out that this whole situation was about that doctor in particular covering up his crime, because she was getting surgery for like the bags under her eyes, but he ended up giving her a nose job, and it would have meant like him, getting a malpractice thing. He would have lost his license, a whole bunch of money. So he killed her to cover it up. It probably wasn't even a situation, because the sad thing is, like, I'm sure for him it's a situation of she would have noticed eventually. So he didn't plan on her dying, but the whole point was just to kind of cover up his crime. Her killing herself, sadly, was just kind of like a sad byproduct of it, even though which isn't to kind of give him any sympathy. It's like, it's still his fault that things kind of turned out that way, but that's what that was. It was just him screwing up, like covering up his mistake. And it's like, well, you have no evidence. The evidence is, the fact is that his finger, it's like, oh, we had this print this entire time and we weren't 100%, it's like, oh, it's a partial print, but it's like, no, we had the whole print the entire time. It shows, because part of his print had gotten burned off because of the chemicals he was dealing with, the acid and everything. So the case was kind of open and shut in that regard. But it wasn't just that interesting aspect to that. There's also another layer to this, obviously everything with Joan. And it's something I didn't even think about at the end of last season either. Like, and I think for Sherlock was happy to have Joan around. It's like, because for him, it's like Joan is a very important part of his world. She's not just his partner, like, she is family to him. And so for him, he's enjoyed having her. And it's like, oh, she's here in London. She's thriving is what I meant to say. Sorry. But Kitty noticed the fact is you got blonde hair now, which it looked good. It looks good on you. But the fact is, it's like, you're a lady that's trying to shake things up. You just aren't as happy as maybe you were when you first got here. So it's like the fact of the matter is, let's not. And I think I let that sit in my mind. Joan was in the process of trying to get the whole, adopt. She was trying to start a family of her own. Like, obviously bring that, Sherlock into that world and everything. But obviously subsequently she's kind of made excuses, and it's like, for her, it's like, the work they do is dangerous. That was always something there, but Michael kind of set something off in her head to be like, yeah, it's even more true because the way Michael, let's not forget, Michael attacked her. So, like, of course, that's going to shake things up. Plus, like, this huge change for her, and Sherlock didn't really, get that at first, because at first it's like, no, she's good, but Kitty's like, I want her here, like, obviously, and you obviously want her here, but the fact is that doesn't mean that necessarily that Joan belongs here. And it's the whole thing is, obviously it's a situation where Sherlock kind of misspoke. I think it's just a thing of like, he, ended up confessing to the whole Michael situation because of her. She's almost like, oh, it's my fault. He's like, no, the thing is, it's like, you wouldn't let me tell the truth that it was Hannah. You were trying to protect her and Gregson. But the fact of the matter is, so I had to make that choice because I wasn't going to let you go to prison and stuff like that, because obviously he cares about her, and he didn't want to put her in that situation. And it's something that kind of comes up in the episode, at the end of the episode, I thought was kind of pretty nice. Is the fact is, for him, it's like, I was willing to accept the consequences. Like, coming back to London, I'd have to deal with that on my own. I knew what it meant by me admitting to the crime. I would never be able to go back to New York, because for him, it's like, being here in London, he loved being in New York, because for him, it's like, it took a little while to kind of adjust and everything, but eventually he did. He's like, oh, like, Watson will too. But for, Kitty had pointed out, the fact is, you were running away from something. She's running towards something. He's like, sure, she wasn't running to me. She doesn't run towards anything. She doesn't run to me. But it's like, yeah, because of course she's not going to let you go through this alone, because you mean so much to her. So of course she's going to make that sacrifice for you. But, it's like in that moment, because knowing that fact is, Sherlock was willing to make that sacrifice for her. So she's like, of course I'm going to do that for you. But then it's that thing of like, given enough time, because it seems like it's been a year in that, so now on top of all that, it's like, now, like, that's weighing heavier on you, like realizing like what it's really that you've given up, your family and friends, your entire life is there in New York. But for Sherlock, it's that difference of like she kind of missing home and everything that it represents. It's just not New York, but what her life was, and everything. And then for Sherlock, it's like London is his home, and it feels good to be home. It might not be under like the best circumstances, the reason why he's back home, but he's home and he feels comfortable again. And now it's kind of like, I think that's going to be, sadly, that might be a continuing storyline we potentially could see this season. It's like him deciding, because obviously it's like maybe we'll see Watson kind of go back to New York, and the duo after all this time might be separated again. I mean, to be fair, over the course of the series, they kind of went their separate ways. Obviously, like, he came back during season 3 after being gone for a while. So it's not like this would be the first time that's ever happened, but still, it'd be under different circumstances, obviously, because obviously Sherlock would want to do, I think it's that aspect of just kind of being a little selfish of like, he cares about Watson, he wants her by his side, he wants his partner, he wants, a person he easily considers family, I did like that cute, adorable moment with him and Archie. She's like, really? You're giving him ice cream? It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. He's like, I'm his godfather, so if I want to give him ice cream, I can give him ice cream. So I thought that was kind of adorable. I think very kind of like, foreshadowing of like the whole, like him helping out Watson potentially with the whole baby situation, because he had set it up like last season, being like, I'm going to be there for you and the baby and be there for whatever, well, not necessarily the baby, but like, I'll be there for you and the child no matter what you need, like, kind of all in for this, because, Joan didn't want him to sacrifice any aspects of his life. And we actually think about it in retrospect, it's like, that was heavily foreshadowing in itself, but she didn't want him to kind of have to adjust and change for that. It's like, this is something I'll handle on my own, but it's like, no, I want to handle it, like, we're in this together type of situation. So I thought that was kind of neat, and it's, like I said, it kind of comes full circle in certain regards. It was, and it only takes me looking back on it now to realize how foreshadowing that was in many different regards. So, but I was actually curious too, like what this season was going to be structured like. So I was like, is there going to be any New York stuff? But then it's like hard cut. Oh, we get Bell. It's like, oh yeah, his days and the stuff with the marshals kind of got put on hold for a little bit. But now like, oh, he's only got a couple days left before he transfers. And obviously it's like, oh, Gregson celebrating like, yeah, look at you, you're great, Bell. Oh, you're awesome. And then he gets a gift from Sherlock and Joan, and Gregson's like demeanor completely changes, and it's like, oh, of course it would be. And then Belle confronts him about stuff. I was like, okay, because the thing is, the moment, like, because Belle is like, you got to make things up with Sherlock and Joan. And he's like, it's not my fault that Sherlock admitted to, the fact is, how am I supposed to forgive him for what he did? And I was like, oh, look at you being all high and mighty. You're lucky Belle doesn't know the truth, but you're hiding by the fact is, this whole thing. But it's like, Belle quickly shuts that down for me because he's like, I know. I'm like, what? It's like, Bell isn't an idiot. He pieced things together. He's, as Sherlock has said it multiple times, he's a really good detective. He figured it out. It's like, oh, I was with you when you got the news that that Sherlock had confessed to Michael's murder. And it's like, you were angry. And I was like, what? He's like, I didn't get the anger, because eventually it's kind of a situation of like, it's almost like Joan and Sherlock didn't exist anymore. It's almost like our whole friendship, this family that we had become, was almost nothing. But then eventually it's like, I come to realize that it wasn't anger, it was guilt. Because for him, it's like, because the thing is, it's like Sherlock and Joan have done nothing but been there for us. They've supported us through so much. They've been nothing but good to us. And it almost feels like, because everyone has to walk around on pins and needles. They even mention Sherlock and Joan's names. It's like nails on a chalkboard. But now it's like, you understand why Gregson feels guilt. Because he's like, especially all the terrible shit he said to Sherlock too, hard cut to like the opening recapping the terrible shit he said to Sherlock, blaming him for everything that happened with Michael and everything. And it's like, which he had no right putting all that burden on Sherlock. It was just a shitty set of circumstances. And even Bell was like, the fact of the matter is, he does not like how anything related to the Michael case went down. And so it's a situation of like, you need to make things right. And it's like, how do I even start by doing that? And it's like, I don't know how, but saying sorry might be a good start. But then you have, him being like, you're right. And but Bale was like, we don't even have to talk about this whole Michael situation, just ever talk about it. But he's like, I thought I was going to miss you, but I didn't realize how much I was. Because in those moments, like, Bell was there to kind of show Gregson like how in the wrong he was, to kind of like get past himself in this situation or try to make the situation right. He's been, wallowing in his own guilt, and obviously the whole situation just pisses him off because he does care about Joan and Sherlock, and he realizes the kind of messed up situation they've been put in. That the whole situation played out like that because they were also protecting Hannah, so obviously it makes him feel even more guilty because Sherlock's paying for a crime and being accused of a crime he had nothing to do with, So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so, but sadly, we see at the end, though, it's like, oh, Gregson got shot by someone. He looks pretty beat up. And now it's like, oh, crap. And now, Bella's like, trying to contact family and everything. So now it's that situation of he's like, I just wanted you guys to know. Now, that's going to be interesting to see what they do. Like, I think, obviously, things have been rocky between them. But no matter what, Gregson has been like family to them, and I think when the time comes, Sherlock and Joan might go back to New York to help solve this crime. Maybe they're gonna, I don't know, or maybe we'll see a situation of Sherlock staying in London while Joan goes back, which we might see her crossing paths with was it Agent Malik, the FBI agent that's accusing her? So they might be crossing paths in that certain regard, which is potentially going to be interesting. But I think that makes the most sense that, Joan's going to go back to make sure, like, oh, I'm going to check on everything. And that might play into the storyline I was talking about of them being kind of divided. Like, she might be back home for a while. I'd start feeling good about it, But it did seem like we don't 100% know how Gregson was going to fix that situation because he can't necessarily turn his own daughter in. He can't, And I'm curious to see what will be the outcome of the situation. Because I was thinking, like I said, I was alluding to earlier, I was kind of like thinking like, oh, Sherlock would go too, but it's like, no, the moment he sets foot in U.S., he's arrested. Not unless he goes in disguise or something like keeps it hidden. But I feel like for this situation, like I said, no matter how much bad blood him and Gregson have, like Gregson has always had his back, despite like the complicated relationship they've had over the course of the series. Like they've had their ups and downs, obviously, but Gregson is still important to him. Like Gregson and Belle are family to him. They're part of his foundation. Kept himself clean, kept him doing good work, so obviously they're very important to him. So I would think he'd want to handle this situation personally, but it's like Gregson's potentially, he might not make it. So this situation might make it so that if Gregson does die, Hannah might confess to the situation just because it's like, it's like her dad's no longer there to kind of convince her not to say anything. So maybe potentially see that. I don't know. I'm very interested to see, where the season takes us. Obviously, like I said, this being the final season and everything. I'm curious to see where the story is going to take us, where the next episode is going to take us with all of it. It's definitely going to be very, very interesting. Because once again, let's not forget the fact is, like, they kind of going through the trouble of giving us a new, landscape, a new city to kind of solve crimes in. So that's why I'm kind of leaning more towards like Joan's going to go back to New York just because of where the stories kind of set things up. And, Sherlock is going to stay in London. So they're going to probably be working on Gregson's case while working on other cases, maybe potentially, or maybe it's just going to be we work on Gregson's case, solve it, but then maybe Joan's going to be like, honestly, I'm going to stay in New York for a little while, or maybe Sherlock's going to convince her to stay and he'll stay in London, and maybe they'll still try to operate as partners even though they're separated, and that might be in itself an issue that ends up bringing up a lot of stuff for Sherlock. There's stuff I've brought up before of like, I'm curious whether or not that's going to be tackled this season, like some of the like Moriarty stuff as well as like the Moreland stuff with Sherlock's dad, like that whole the whole Cabal situation. I'm curious. I would assume that's a pretty big open storyline that was kind of settled last season, but still, like, things are at a stalemate, and I feel like I don't know if that's something they're going to keep for the final season. Like I said, I'm curious to see how they handle all of this. I'm very excited to have Elementary back, even if it is just for the final season. I'm so curious to see how they wrap this series up. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.